Aleister Crowley has always appealed to me because he stands out among all the great mystics of the world in being the most egregious case. There are some pretty weird mystics in all traditions, and some that look like they were part-time crazy, but there's nobody quite compares to Crowley. Mary D'Este Sturgis, who was Crowley's mistress around 1911 and wrote the introduction to his book 4, she said other religious leaders say believe me, Crowley says don't believe me. Now that's what I find most attractive about him, is his constant skepticism and don't believe me. Try the exercises and find out for yourself. He studied most of the schools of consciousness alteration that existed in his time. He studied yoga with the Hindus and the Buddhists and various different types of yoga, Hatha yoga, Gnana yoga, Raja yoga, Tantra yoga. He learned a lot about Taoism in China, became an I Ching expert long before there were any others in the Western world who knew anything about I Ching. Did his own translation of the Tao Te Ching. Studied a little Sufism in North Africa, evidently. He was the leading authority in his time in the Western occult tradition. And he picked up bits and snatches of all sorts of other things in his travels around the world, including a great deal about shamanic traditions that use drugs to alter consciousness. He knew more about that than anybody before the 1960s. So all in all, reading Crowley's books, he gives you, in most of his books, he gives you a lot of exercises along with the theory. And if you start doing the exercises that Crowley gives you, you find your consciousness does alter. And then you find the universe alters, which of course is inevitable because the only universe you know is the universe in your consciousness. So this is kind of confusing to some people. But this combination of do the work and don't believe anybody's dogmas, draw your own conclusions after you've done the work. I like that approach. Crowley put it into a poem once, which I'm fond of. We place no reliance on virgin or pigeon. Our method is science. Our aim is religion. I think that's a terrific approach, especially when you look around at so many things that are called New Age that are so gullible and medieval. They're people who you feel you could easily sell them the Brooklyn Bridge if you were inclined. They'd go and get their savings out of the bank and hand it to you right away. Compared to the gullibility and superstition in most New Age centers, Crowley is really refreshing, like cold water in the face, really wakes you up.
What about some of the stories of like him smashing a glass by looking at it, the Oxford demonstration, and then the stories I've read about the psychic war that carried on with S.L. McGregor Mathers? Is that correct? The guy's, am I getting his name correct?
There's a lot of interesting stories about Crowley, and I don't think there is yet a really good biography of Crowley. They're all biased. Most of them are biased against him. His enemies got into print before his friends. And there are several books that portray Crowley as a raving monster and demented maniac, sadist and whatnot. And then his friends or admirers started writing biographies that are equally prejudiced and try to portray him as the magus of the new Aeon, the utterer of the word of the law, which will transform the whole planet to higher consciousness sometime in the very near future. We're supposed to have entered, according to the Orthodox Crowleyans, we are supposed to have entered the Aeon of Horus in 1904. And if you ask what is the evidence, well, the world certainly has gotten a lot weirder since 1904. When the Aeon of Horus fully manifests itself is an open question. Is it going to take 500 years, or is it going to happen in 2012 like everybody else's prophecies? Well, I don't know. But meanwhile, we've got all this literature about Crowley, some of it absolutely incredible. One of the most widely published stories about Crowley is the time he and his son MacGregor went into a hotel room in Paris and drew a pentagram and invoked the devil. And in the morning, MacGregor was found dead of a heart attack, and Crowley was off his head and had to spend 6 months in a mental hospital and never quite regained his intellectual faculties. That story has appeared in quite a few books. The fascinating thing about it is it first appeared in a work of fiction, a novel by Dennis Wheatley. Dennis Wheatley was the head of the Double Cross Bureau of English Intelligence. Crowley was a part-time employee of MI5. Each one of them seems to have been highly suspicious of the other. Wheatley had a tendency to believe that any conspiracy he wasn't supervising personally was the work of the devil. And, well, the Double Cross Bureau had some real weirdos in it anyway. Besides Wheatley, Ian Fleming worked in the Double Cross Bureau. You see what kind of rich fantasy life he had when you read the James Bond novels. And Alan Turing, who invented the Turing machine problem, also worked there. Anyway, Wheatley's invention in a novel called For the Devil a Bride, about Crowley and his son invoking the devil. There are lots of weaknesses in this story. For instance, Crowley never spent any time in a mental hospital in France. And for another thing, his son MacGregor never showed any interest in magic or in Crowley's occult studies. And for a third thing, Crowley didn't die of a heart attack in a hotel room in Paris. And the most clinching argument of all is there never was a son named MacGregor Crowley. The whole thing was made up out of whole cloth. There's not one fact in that. Now, that's typical of a lot of the legends about Crowley. Once you start examining them, you find out they were created either by Crowley out of his wicked sense of humor or by his enemies out of their total lack of humor, and it's very hard to find out what to believe. I didn't. It took me a long time to decide whether or not to believe he worked for English intelligence, but the evidence has accumulated enough that I believe that, although it sounds like something he might have invented. He did invent some pretty tall tales about himself.
The English Intelligence Service, that was what, prior to and during World War II?
It was during World War II. Crowley evidently worked in the propaganda division. Among other things, he proposed the sign that's identified with Winston Churchill, the V for Victory sign, which is invoking the powers of Set, the Egyptian donkey-headed deity that Crowley regarded as a good mischievous spirit to set against your enemies. Crowley did various other things for English intelligence. All the details are far from clear.
What about the rivalry between him and S.L. McGregor Mathers and the supposed I've read some things about like McGregor Mathers set a swarm of rats or locusts on his house. I mean, then they were like in different parts of Europe when this was going on.
Crowley's psychic and propaganda war with McGregor Mathers was real. Was typical of the kookiness of the occult world. McGregor Mathers arose to the position of outer head of the Golden Dawn, which was the primary magical order in England at that time. Yeats and several others decided Mathers had become a tyrant and perhaps a megalomaniac. They unseated him and formed a rival Golden Dawn, claiming he was unfit to lead. Crowley sided with Mathers, and Yeats developed the opinion that Crowley had set demons upon him because of his rebellion against Mathers. Then Crowley and Mathers had a quarrel, and they each accused the other of setting demons upon them. But they finally got to court because Crowley, in his magazine Equinox, started publishing all the secret rituals of the Golden Dawn. He announced that the secret chiefs had authorized him to do this. This is the kind of thing that cannot be judged in a court of law because the secret chiefs did not take the form in space-time wherein they can testify in a courtroom. The secret chiefs exist only where the square root of -1 exists, or the White Rabbit of Alice in Wonderland. You got to be in a special state to contact the secret chiefs, and no court is quite equipped to do it. So if one guy says the secret chiefs told me this, and somebody else said the secret chiefs told me the opposite, there's no evidential way of judging between them. You just decide which one you think is crazier than the other. So anyway, Crowley claimed the secret chiefs authorized him to publish these rituals. Mathers tried to stop it. The trial turned into all sorts of irrelevant issues, such as whether Mathers had or had not alleged that he was the reincarnation of King Charles I, which Mathers didn't want to answer on the witness stand for fear of prejudicing the jury, but was compelled to admit he had at times claimed to be the reincarnation of Charles I. There wasn't Charles II, I think. And there were various innuendos about Crowley's sex life, which Crowley enjoyed very much, although most of the other people did not enjoy it. Crowley really had a weak spot for, he didn't mind how much trouble he got into or how much pain he caused those around him. If he had a chance to do something that would shock the British public, he'd go ahead and do it. And the most amazing thing about his life is that he stayed out of jail. He lived to be 72 and never spent a day in jail. It's amazing for a person with his temperament. Everybody I know who remotely reminds me of Crowley has spent time in jail. You can't have that attitude of deliberately flaunting society's rules. I think Sinead O'Connor is going to end up in jail eventually, for instance. Crowley was sort of a cross between Sinead O'Connor and Madonna in a male form. Well, as a matter of fact, that's another of the interesting Crowley legends. Crowley predicted he would reincarnate to carry on the work of initiating the new Aeon, only when he came back it would be as a woman. And you'd be surprised how many women I've met who claim they are Crowley reincarnated. It's a long, long list. The one I find most plausible has never made the claim. That's Madonna. She has her own shtick. She doesn't need the claim to be Crowley. She's got a big enough audience already.
What What other legends of I don't know how to describe these events. I don't want to say supernatural, but what other legends are there around Crowley besides the glass smashing demonstration? I think that was that at Oxford?
The most fascinating to me of the occult side of Crowley, there's many sides to Crowley. You can look at Crowley entirely as a linguistic philosopher in the tradition of Wittgenstein. It went even further than Wittgenstein. There's a book called Portable Darkness, an anthology of Crowley's writings, which the editor pretty much interprets Crowley as a linguistic philosopher chiefly and makes everything else secondary. But if you do want to look into, there's many ways of looking at Crowley. I like to look at him as a scientist in the consciousness alteration field, a pioneer, a forerunner of Tim Leary and Stan Groff and John Lilly and all the great consciousness researchers of the last 30 years. Crowley was 50 years ahead of everybody else. But on the occult side, the most fascinating thing is the Book of the Law, which Crowley was, first of all, one of the most notorious practical jokers of his time. He was responsible for numerous hoaxes. It's very difficult to tell when he's kidding and when he's serious. His books are all written. That's part of his way of keeping you on the qui-vive, making it arousing curiosity so you will try the experiments, and also keeping you from just accepting things as dogma. He's constantly playing games in his style. Is this serious or is this another of his jokes? And he did perform some outstanding hoaxes. One of the most famous was the Hail Mary hoax, which was a book of hymns to the Blessed Virgin, allegedly written by a nun. It turned out to be written by Aleister Crowley. And he explained after the hoax was revealed that he wrote the poems to Isis, but he thought since the Virgin Mary is just the modern version of Isis, it could be just as easily presented that way and would have a bigger audience. And there were lots of fascinating hoaxes that he was involved in. And then there's the Book of the Law, which is allegedly a communication from higher intelligence about which Crowley was very cryptic. He said he got it from his holy guardian angel. He told one disciple, the holy guardian angel is not in any sense your higher self, like in theosophy and a lot of occult movements. It's a separate being of much higher intelligence than a human. He told another disciple the holy guardian angel was just a metaphor for your own unconscious. So he directly contradicted himself depending on who he was talking to. And he was a well-known hoaxer. Nonetheless, everything he ever wrote about the Book of the Law, he insisted he was serious this time. He was not hoaxing. Of course, the best hoaxes all begin that way. I'm not performing a hoax this time. I'm being serious. He insists the Book of the Law is a revelation from higher intelligence. It's not a hoax, and that he has suffered throughout his whole life from the duty to speak the truth as revealed in this book, no matter how much trouble it made for him. And that is, I suppose, the major koan in Crowley's system, which is called Thelema. He didn't want it named after himself. He was terrified that he'd been back in 2,000 years and find Crowleyanity had become as reactionary as Christianity. So he insisted on it being called Thelema, so at least his name would not be disgraced, whatever his disciples did with the movement. And Thelema, stop a minute. You can edit this.
Okay.
In the Thelemic system, there are koans, just as in Zen Buddhism. There are points in Zen. You're studying Zen. The Roshi gives you a koan to work on. A riddle like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or who is the master who makes the grass green? Crowley has koans built into his system. They're not presented as koans. You just run into them and you suddenly stop. And what am I going to do about this? Am I going to believe him? Am I going to think it's a joke? Is there a hidden meaning? And the big koan is, do you believe in the Book of the Law, or is it just the one joke that he kept a straight face about for most of his life? And it's fascinating how different people react to that. I find it fascinating because the Book of the Law does seem it's just spooky enough to keep you guessing where it came from. Israel Regardie, who studied with Crowley in the 20s and later became a Reichian psychotherapist in Los Angeles, Regardie suggests that Crowley had 9 personalities at various levels of the psyche, and the deepest level was, he gives names to these in terms of Crowley's magical titles, and the deepest level was Awas, which is not only the deepest level of Crowley's unconscious, if I understand this, it's the deepest level of the human psyche. It is the collective mind of humanity, and that was speaking through the Book of the Law, according to Regardie's interpretation. It certainly is an interesting challenge to try to decide that, especially since they got so much reason for just dismissing the whole thing and deciding, well, Crowley is just the biggest hoaxer who ever lived. By the way, there are 5 branches of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the magical order of which Crowley was the outer head, and they all denounce each other as bogus, which is as it should be. And trying to get into a magical order, you should have to go through intelligence tests of deciding whether you found the right one or not. The English branch under Kenneth Grant has pretty much taken the position that the intelligence behind the Book of the Law is an extraterrestrial from the system of the double star Sirius. I find that very interesting because, well, no, I don't think I'll go into that. That's a topic for some other evening, I think. I think, well, why I'm especially interested in Sirius and extraterrestrial sending communications from there. I'll let that pass this time. People probably want to get to sleep anyway, and they don't want to they don't want to get too weirded out at this hour.
What about the Book of Lies? There's several musicians, recording artists that are into Crowley. I'm digressing a bit. Daryl Hall, I think, is a member of the Golden Dawn. I saw one of the members of a group ministry saying that you should read the Book of Lies, that it will change your life. How do you compare that with the Book of the Law?
And the Book of Lies is one of my favorites of Crowley's books. I don't know, it's hard to say which is weirder and funnier and more mysterious, the Book of the Law or the Book of Lies. I guess the Book of the Law has more perpetual shock in it. Every time you go back to it, you get shocked again and shook up a little bit more. The Book of Lies is a lot funnier, but it requires careful study. It's got so many different kinds of jokes in it. Every chapter, the number of the chapter is important. There are Kabbalistic jokes about the number of the chapter in every chapter. There are jokes within jokes and anagrams and acrostics, and every conceivable way of saying 10 things at the same time and keeping you confused about which ones are serious and which ones are jokes, and is there a difference? And many times you'll find a passage where the surface meaning is conventionally religious, not in the ordinary sense. Conventionally mystic, it could be Lao Tzu or Buddha or some Sufi. It could be any great mystic. And then you suddenly discover there's a dirty joke hidden under that. And you think, boy, what a mixed up mind he had. He was a real weird, what a weird sense of humor. Then you find the dirty joke has behind that an allegory which takes you back to the mystical level again. And then you find out you can interpret it in terms of Freudian or Jungian psychology, and that Crowley obviously understood that and wanted you to see that. Then you wonder how many more levels you can find. And it gets funnier and funnier. It sounds it is very intellectual, but it's very funny too. It's very intellectual humor, like Lewis Carroll's mathematical logic, in which he proves some dowagers are thistles. He has a perfectly logical proof of that. And the Book of Lies is that kind of humor. He even wrote a commentary on it, which is even funnier. A commentary in one place, he talks about some of the logical errors he committed in that chapter, deliberately violating the rules of logic just to confuse the people further. And he says, but after listening to errors in logic, he says, but to explain this further would set the book beyond the understanding of the common reader in Oshkosh for whom I am writing. And of course, the common person in Oshkosh is not going to understand more than 3 lines of this book. I think I place it pretty much in the same general area as Finnegan's Wake. It's not as great as an artistic achievement as Finnegan's Wake, but it's equally funny and equally inexhaustible. And the more you dive into it, the more you find. You can go on for years and years, just like with Finnegan's Wake, finding more and more meanings and more jokes.
How, in the Book of the Law, and I'm not familiar, I haven't really pored over the Book of the Law and Book of Lies. In fact, every time I go into a bookstore, I can always usually find the Book of the Law, but I rarely ever see a copy of the Book of Lies. How does one who's just maybe investigating Crowley for the first time get beyond all the hidden meanings and the cryptic?
Get a hold of Magic, which is 3 parts of Book 4, and don't ask me why the publisher left out the 4th part. The doings of publishers are even more mysterious than the doings of magicians. I think the publisher is Samuel Weiser. I'm not sure of that. But anyway, Magic has the Book 4 has 4 parts. Magic and Yoga. No, wait a minute. Yoga and Magic, and philosophical commentaries on the Book of the Law. And the book called Magic consists of the first 3. And it's full of exercises. So the more confused you get by Crowley, the more motive you have for trying the exercises. And if you try the exercises, it's absolutely guaranteed that you'll get more confused. But you'll also begin to see light where you never saw it before. The world becomes, as Crowley says, a continuous ceremony of initiation.
What do you recommend as far as experiments or rituals for someone who has no experience with Crowley? I mean, what level do you start, or what?
It's Crowley. He wrote a little poem to help you remember that. My name is Aleister Crowley, because that I am holy. My enemies say Crowley and wish to treat me foully. So now you'll never forget how to pronounce it. It's Crowley.
Crowley. How do you feel? Is there a certain lineage, say, between Mathers and Levi and Crowley? And do you think there's a certain lineage there?
Yes, that's one of the things that got me involved in the study of Crowley and his works. This is the one area where the rationalist approach to history absolutely breaks down. If you try to find out the truth about any of these magical societies that Crowley was involved with, especially the Golden Dawn, the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Illuminati, the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, and about 20 or 30 others of less importance that he was involved in at one time or another. You find every one of them, the trail disappears into fog. Beyond a certain point, everything becomes uncertain and mysterious. It's like the intrusion into this world of another world.
How does John Dee and is it, I don't know if I pronounced the name correctly, Eliphas Levi? How do I pronounce his name?
Eliphas, I think.
Levi. How do they fit in with the later lineage, and how the Golden Dawn and the Ordo Templi Orientis are separate, but I see them as very similar. I mean, they seem, but they are two separate entities or groups, aren't they?
Mysteries within mysteries, endless mysteries. Eliphas Levi seems to be the enemy of the kind of occultism that Crowley was involved in. Crowley translated one of Levy's books and always spoke highly of Levy, praising him to the skies. Eliphas Levi wasn't Jewish, by the way. That was a pen name. He was actually a Roman Catholic mystic. But Crowley despised the Catholic Church even more than Sinead O'Connor does. When Crowley refers to the Black Brothers, the doers of evil who have set a spell over mankind to put us in slavery, he means the Roman Catholic Church. It takes a while to decipher that one, but Crowley was one of the leading anti-Catholic revolutionaries of the last couple of centuries. And yet here he is in the same party with this Roman Catholic mystic who wrote under a Jewish name. But that's the way it was. The magical world is full of these mysteries and paradoxes and false fronts. And John Dee was Queen Elizabeth's astrologer and a great mathematician, and he got some fragments in a language which several linguists claim is a real language, not just gibble-gabble made up or pretense. It's a real language, but it's not a human language. And was Dee bright enough to invent the language? Maybe he was. But it turns out a century before him, another magician named Pico della Mirandola in Italy got a few other fragments in that language. And of course, in the Golden Dawn, Crowley learned to use that language, which is supposed to allow you to converse with angels, Enochian spirits. Grady McMurtry, who was the Caliph of the Ordo Templi Orientis until his death a few years ago, he told me he asked Crowley once when it was safe to summon the Enochian spirits, and Crowley said, "You don't have to summon them. When you're ready, they come for you." The Ordo Templi Orientis and the Golden Dawn are officially very opposed to each other, and yet without mentioning names, I don't want to give away too much, I know somebody who's the leader of one branch of the Golden Dawn and a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis. There are at least 3 branches of the Golden Dawn in California, each of them denouncing the others as bogus. Then there's the new Reformed Orthodox Order of the Golden Dawn, which doesn't claim to be genuine at all. Then there's the fake Sufi school, by the way. You know how many orders of Sufis there are running around California, all claiming we're the true Sufis, the others are all fakes? Well, there's a group called the Fake Sufi School up in Nevada City for the fake Sufis.
But What about is it the Rosicrucians? What about the order? I guess there's a few. There's one in San Jose, and
Yeah, the gang in there's another Rosicrucian order in Pennsylvania. The gang in San Jose who do all the advertising got their charter from Crowley.
They got their charter from
I'm pretty
Crowley?
sure of that. Crowley says so, others say so, and a student of occultistry, I know, tried several times to get them to show him their charter, and they just kept evading and making excuses. They don't want to be connected with Crowley. And yeah, that's where they got their charter from.
Why do they want
Crowley
to
was the
disavow?
head of the Rosicrucian order in Europe at one point.
Why do they want to disavow any connection to Crowley?
Because the Hearst newspapers have left this heritage behind. Crowley is a Satanist and a very evil person in general.
Along with, I guess, with the John Bull in England calling him the wickedest man in the world or something.
I thought Crowley invented that himself, the wickedest man in the world.
When he takes the name, or when did he take the number 666? And was that just kind of a rebellious kind of reaction to his...
That's another mysterious thing. He implies that somebody else did it first. In one of his early poems, he says...
Didn't he say at one point, or not him, biographers have said his mother called him the beast?
Yeah, that's very vague. He did something and his mother called him a beast. He's probably masturbating. That's the kind of thing. I think that's the most plausible guess, because it's described in such evasive language. But the 666 thing, a very early poem, he has these lines: by all sorts of monkey tricks they make my name mean 666. Well, I will deserve it if I can. It is the number of a man. So apparently somebody else did it, but he did it himself several times. In the complete Kabbalah of Aleister Crowley, he has 4 or 5 different ways in which he can get his name to add up to 666. Aleister E. Crowley one way, and Alexander Crowley, which was his birth name, another way, and he got it to add up 666 several different ways, including creating a magical name for himself called Megatherion, which adds up to 666 in Greek and means the great beast.
How you doing?
Hi there.
It's funny, we were talking about how he adopted the name, or the number 666.
Yes, then the 666 appears as a number of evil in the Book of Revelations of St. John, who apparently ate too many funny mushrooms on Patmos and had a lot of weird visions. It sounds like he got into the wrong kind of mushrooms as far as... Well, anyway, be that as it may. Crowley's deciphering, Kabbalistic deciphering of Book of Revelations led him to the conclusion it should be read in reverse. It's sectarian propaganda for the Aeon of Osiris, warning against the Aeon of Horus. But since we've now entered the Aeon of Horus, we've got to turn everything backwards. So 666 becomes a positive number, as it was in the last Aeon, the Aeon of Isis. It's the number of the sun, Kabbalistically. And when this came up in one of Crowley's numerous appearances in court, the prosecutor asked him, "Do you not use the number 666? Is this not a number of evil?" Crowley says, "Not at all, it just means the sun. If you want to, you can call me Sunny Boy." That reminds me of the time he had his first art show in Greenwich Village. And a critic from the New York Times asked him, "To what school do you think your works belong?" And Crowley said, "I'd rather imagine I'm an old master." Like I said at the beginning, he was a great put-on artist. Anyway, 666 does symbolize the sun, and as John Michel in his book, The View Over Atlantis, points out, it appears in a lot of Christian architecture. There was a Gnostic underground tradition that recognized the positive meaning of the sun archetype. In Jungian terms, Crowley identified with what Jung calls the solar phallic archetype, which I think is clear enough and doesn't require, all you gotta do is open a few pages of Crowley and you get the solar and phallic energy coming at you right away. You don't even have to read Jung to find out what solar phallic means.
So the Rosicrucian Order in San Jose got the chart of Crowley, and
I think the Rastafarians probably owe even more to Crowley.
Rastafarians do?
Yeah. I think their religion is a lot closer to Crowley's teachings than the Rosicrucian gang in San Jose. This I intend as high praise to the Rastafarians. They may not quite see it that way, and I hope they don't misunderstand me.
There's probably, I guess, no way to really, if they even do exist, of proving whether any of the Rosicrucian orders are actually can trace their lineage back to the original, if they're really ever. There's even debate of whether Rosicrucians ever really existed at all, isn't there?
Oh yes, there's one school of historians who believes that somebody, some person or persons for unknown reasons put out 3 pamphlets announcing the Rosicrucian Order and then didn't do anything else to follow up on it, and it was all a big hoax. I don't know, people who can believe that, they're the kind of people who believe if you throw junk over the fence for 4 billion years it'll turn into a 747 jumbo jet in operational order.
How does alchemy and the Kabbalah tie in with well, not all of these, but I mean groups such as the Ordo Templi Orientis and the Golden Dawn and the Rosicrucians? And does it tie in with Masonry at all? Is that one of the main foundations of the
That is such an enormous question.
Yeah.
Masonry, Rosicrucianism, alchemy, Kabbalah, all related in a variety of ways, but disentangling them and explaining the historical connections and how it all happened is almost impossible because no two authorities agree, and there is, like I said, everything disappears into fog eventually. I decided, at one point I decided that the Masonry in the 18th century, which we know it existed then, there's a lot of debate how much further back we can trace it. I'm inclined to accept some of the evidence that we can trace it back to the 17th century. And then it gets more and more debatable, but anyway, it was there in the 18th century. And I figured out the 32 degrees and the 33rd at the top being honorary. It corresponds to the Tree of Life well enough that there must have been Kabbalists in on the creation of Masonry. And probably there are lots of other Masonic Kabbalistic elements in Masonry. But the 32 degrees weren't invented until Albert Pike in the 19th century, who was a Kabbalist, and he put a lot more Kabbalah in Masonry. So there was some Kabbalah in Masonry from the beginning, and then more got put in by Albert Pike, who incidentally said the star on the floor of every Masonic temple represents Sirius. That's an odd remark.
But I mean, do you think that is the bulk of Masonry founded, or the bulk of Rosicrucianism founded on the Kabbalah? Is that, or are there other, what other elements are there to the
Hermetic, what's called Hermetic thought, which was a combination of Gnosticism, Kabbalah, and alchemy, had an underground existence in Europe for about 1,000 years. Every time the Inquisition discovered any of it, they arrested everybody and burned them at the stake. But it still went on as an underground force, and it used various fronts, and among these fronts were the Rosicrucian movement and later Masonry. Then later, still in the 18th century, Masonry got taken over by, I think, I've been studying this a long time, so I have a right to an opinion, even though it's only an opinion. I can't claim to have the absolute truth. In the 18th century, it got taken over by a rationalistic group who used Masonry chiefly as a way of trying to end the religious wars that were tearing Europe apart, and to establish the modern kind of democratic state in which there is no established religion. You might say the most enduring product of Freemasonry is the First Amendment to the American Constitution, which says Congress shall establish no religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof, which leaves it up to everybody to decide what religion they want, and doesn't allow anybody to go out with an army and try to destroy somebody else's religion. That is what Masonry mainly was involved in throughout the 18th century, and they finally succeeded. By the early 19th century, that was the generally accepted idea of civilized countries. You still find the older idea that the true religion should destroy all the false ones in backward and barbarous places like the Mid-East or Northern Ireland. But in the civilized world, Masonry has triumphed.
How does the Martinist order tie in with Masonry and Rosicrucianism? Are they affiliated or related in any way?
The Martinists were involved in Hermetic practices, and they relate to the Golden Dawn, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and similar occult orders, and backwards to the Knights Templar probably. They use the word Illuminati also, and sometimes get confused with the Bavarian Illuminati, which seems to have been more political. There was a lot. These things, we can separate them into categories, but in history they weren't always separated. They blended, came together, and parted again. And like Mozart's magic flute is a Masonic ritual disguised as an opera, which is pretty generally recognized, but buried underneath it there's a political, there's a lot of propaganda against the monarchy and in favor of democracy. And there's also, according to some interpretations, there's a hidden plea in there to admit women to Freemasonry.
In the magic flute?
Yes.
Each degree, I mean, there's 33 degrees. You said the 33rd is honorary. It's not. Is it separate from the other 32?
Yeah, the 33rd is just given for being a Mason for a long time and doing something outstanding. It's given, for instance, to everybody who gets nominated. Every Mason who gets nominated for president gets elevated to the 33rd degree right away.
Just by virtue of being nominated?
Well, first they got to go through all the degrees they haven't gone through, but that can be done in a weekend. They have a special weekend crash course.
Where you can go through 32 degrees or...
Well, most people have reached at least the 4th degree. The general tendency is to encourage people to go to the 4th degree and then not discourage them to go further. Only those who are really curious, is there a real mystery here, are the ones who go further up to till they finally reach the 32nd, where the ultimate secret is revealed. Every degree has a very complicated and beautiful ritual, except the 32nd.
You were saying the other degrees, there's a beautiful ritual until, except for the 32nd. That was what really left off.
Yes, the rituals of Masonry are so beautiful and so intellectually coherent and teach such powerful moral and spiritual lessons in terms of such emotionally moving drama that you can't study the system without feeling there was genius at the highest level involved in the creation of Masonry. I'm not saying every Mason is a genius. A lot of them are. Well, the Masons that I have the greatest regard for will all spend most of their time bitching about why can't we get the right types anymore.
Into the order, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, you know, they used to get people like Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn and Voltaire and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and people like that. And, now who do they get? The vice president in charge of loans at the local bank. Anyway, the 32nd degree, there's no ritual. The candidate comes into a room and there's a little screen and a chair in front of it, and he sits in the chair, and from behind the screen somebody speaks to him and a voice he recognizes and tells him astounding things. And there's nothing dramatic about it at all. But it probably changes them for the rest of their lives.
When you say astounding things, how do you elaborate on that?
Absolutely not.
No?
Let's just say that was among the many initiations Crowley went through. He went through many others.
You said that...
And Ceylon and India and North Africa and other places.
You said that for the 33rd degree, if someone's at least up to the 4th, they can go through all the other degrees in a weekend?
Well, if they're nominated for president, it's part of the tradition that there'll always be a 33rd degree Mason before they enter the White House. Now, we got two right now. We got a president and a vice president who are both Southern Baptists. I would be willing to bet money that at least one of them is a Mason. I bet both of them are.
Jesse Jackson's a Mason.
Prince Hal Lodge. That's one of the things. Everything is less beautiful than it looks. Masonry could have been so beautiful and could still be, but it's been segregated a long time. They keep the black people in the Prince Hal lodges and the white people in the Scotch Rite lodges, and it's...
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they don't let women in. Well, they do in some lodges, but the lodges that do are generally condemned by the United Grand Lodge, and Masonry still has a way to go.
The rituals, the degrees are all the same. It's just that they,
No, there are different. The Scotch Rite has the 32 degrees, and the honorary, that's the biggest in the United States. The Grand Orient Lodge, I forget how many degrees they got. They are the ones that are continually getting into trouble politically every century. And the Order of Memphis and Mizraim actually has 97 degrees. Crowley got all 97 of them, but that was one of those, I almost said swindle. That was one of those magical, he gave all the Masonic degrees he was entitled to give to Theodore, what's his name, and in return, that guy gave Crowley all the degrees up to the 97th in the Order of Memphis and Mizra.
What,
Some people just get into this, collecting Masonic degrees. if you, Crowley once sent a telegram to Arthur Waits in which he signed it with all his Masonic titles. The telegram consisted of the one word yes, and the titles taped up about 9 pages. I think it was an answer to the last sentence of Waite's Encyclopedia of Masonry, which is something to the effect, after all this investigation, is there one anywhere on this planet who claims to know what the original secret of Masonry was? I think that was what provoked Crowley to send him the telegram saying yes.
When people are, say, at a lower degree, are they aware of what the rituals or the initiations are for the degrees above them?
Well, they can. They can they can find out if they want to, but it would be wiser for them not to. That is to say, you can go if you have the time and the patience. It doesn't take long. You hunt around used bookstores, and you can find enough books on the secrets of Masonry revealed to find out what's going on. But if you're going through the initiations, it's better not to know. It's better if you you never recapture the thrill of seeing Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom or whatever the hell. You never recapture the thrill on the second or the third viewing, right? It's better to be surprised.
Yeah.
And it's better to be surprised in magic rituals than to know what's coming.
It also biases, I suppose, your outlook on the results or the process.
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable going into any of the degrees that you received, or I didn't take that off?
No, I prefer to remain mysterious.
Okay.